And from the Anvil Orchestra, help me welcome Terry Donahue.
Thank you so much.
Terry, before we bring the others out for the Q&A, I just want you to tell us a little bit about, did I get that right, about how you got the name, you were formerly the Alloy Orchestra, and how the Anvil Orchestra come about?
Well, yes, we were the Alloy Orchestra for close to 35 years. And one of our first years at the Telluride Film Festivals, we met Roger, and I wish we had. Our sound guy took a picture of Roger taking a picture of the band, and it was just fabulous, and you know, it's lost over the years. And so Roger has always been a great friend to the band, and yes, one day he mistakenly referred to us as the Anvil Orchestra. So we stuffed that in our back pocket. If we ever need to change our name, we got the perfect one and a great story to go along with it. So after 35 years and COVID hit, and one of the three decided, you know, that was enough for him. So Roger Miller and myself, who's up there waiting to sell you stuff.
In the East Lobby.
Yep. We decided to keep on going. So out of respect for the past and, you know, using the great story, we decided to change it to the Anvil Orchestra.
And I love that name, the Anvil Orchestra, yes.
It's kind of more fitting for before, you know, if you've seen us before, they were a lot heavier, a lot more rhythmic.
Yes.
You know, we're getting older, and the films that we're trying to find now are more atmospheric and suspenseful, and this is the perfect. And last year's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was another great example of that.
Well, thank you. Why don't you sit in the...
Musical chairs, anywhere you want me, Chaz.
Why don't you sit here?
I'll sit here.
I'm going to call out Larry Karaszewski to here next to you.
Hello.
And Professor Todd Rindelman, who's also been here for many, many years. And this morning, we are going to have so not only do we try to get new audiences each year, but we also try to give opportunities to students. Yesterday, we had a student, Adam Buffini, on stage with us. This morning, we're going to have one of Nate Cohen's students from Athens, Georgia. Please help me welcome Cash Robinson. Come out, Cash. Do you each have your microphones?
I think so. Yeah.
Then I'll leave you to it. Thank you.
I love the story of the talkie version with the Czechoslovakian woman and Hitchcock's, the way he dove into the silent and the way they did the live dubbing and had to figure that out because it was all shot. What are you going to do without her? I mean, she's kind of important.
I mean, but watching the silent version this morning, what I was really struck by, I think I just kind of freestyled this morning saying it's really kind of the first Hitchcock thriller, the first movie that really feels like a Hitchcock movie. And watching it, the whole architecture of the frame, almost every single shot, my jaw dropped. It was just kind of like, because of being a silent film, that's all you're looking at, and just like the way he constructs those scenes, and it's such a beautiful piece of work.
Well, I haven't seen the one with sound, but I was going to ask you if you feel like it's as compelling as this one, because I think it being silent, it really displays his power as a visual director. And it's really gripping.
It feels a bit maybe livelier, the sound version, only because it's like, but having this with the score was just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
That was just a magnificent score. Yeah, I was blown away by that. But you know, like some of the great Hitchcock scenes in all of his films are kind of silent. Whether it's Cary Grant in the cornfield, even the psycho shower scene, you know, or the birds when there's music playing, but and sometimes it's very specific music. But it's amazing how many of his films will at some point drop dialogue entirely, and the thrilling aspect is just the way he constructs it shot after shot after shot.
And he kind of had a great composer for all his sound films,
The
so
best,
we
Bernard
were
Herrmann.
a little terrified of trying to fill those shoes.
Well, I wanted to ask you if when you guys are composing the films that you do, if you ever look at any like surviving scores from the 20s and 30s from the actual films, or if you just
Well, we never do, and we never have. And some of them are fabulous, and just like anything, some are slightly less fabulous. But in the silent era, there were very few specific scores to films, and if there were, they would show in the big cities with full orchestras, and then they would get whittled down to a lot of experimentation, and sometimes the church organist or whoever could play, whoever was there would do something, and there was just so much experimentation. So when we started doing this, we tried to stay in that same vein of experimentation and just trying to translate what we see into what you hear. Now, and not looking back to the 20s, we're trying to help catapult this film from the 20s into now, because the listening audience has changed over all the time with TVs and talkies and all that stuff. So
That was one of the
that's what
first
we
things
had
I
to do.
noticed. I felt like you guys were giving it a modern score that also didn't disrespect what was happening on screen.
Well, thanks. That's definitely what we're trying to do.
And what I do often when I watch a silent film, I just turn the sound off. Because of what you said, I feel like there are actually some good scores and background stuff, but a lot of times I find it more compelling if I just turn the sound off, and then I have to watch it. So I don't it's like we're watching a Charlie Chaplin movie, and whatever, it feels like, it's telling me what's going on, and it actually becomes less interesting. So if you turn the sound on, you gotta follow shot to shot to shot. Is this a funny scene? Is this a thrilling scene? And it adds up. My wife actually goes even further than that. When she watches sports on TV, when she watches a basketball game, she will turn the sound off too and just watch it visually, because then you have to follow the ball.
Yeah.
It's not this thing going in the background. And so I find when I show people silent films, often I do not have any sound at all.
Right, because it can appear to be corny at times. And what I find, there's a lot of great piano players that still do scores, but what I find is, as great as a piano is, it can be, hard to listen to for that amount of time. So I feel like, at least personally, I need more sound than that. But the other thing is, if you watch that same film with 5 different composers, it would make you feel 5 completely different ways. So there's a certain freedom and definitely a certain responsibility to try to be true to these films that we go for.
I mean, the silent version is more visually striking than the sound version. Like, for instance, in the famous sequence where she goes up to the apartment with the artist, that whole over-the-shoulder shot that kind of pins her when she's changing as he's approaching her slowly, that's an iconic Hitchcock visual move, and that doesn't appear in the sound version itself. There's lots of moments like that, and then of course that sequence is really well.
It's a beautiful. It's with Hitchcock's best. That rape murder sequence is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it initiates his fascination with the intersections of these random moments of sexuality and violence that come up unexpectedly, and the whole sequence there with them behind the curtain is sort of initiating themes that many people vividly remember, that will culminate like in Psycho, of course, where we're not seeing what's actually happening, but we're being asked to sort of imagine or to participate in figuring out what it is that's going on. And so it isn't graphic, but we often think that it is.
It's not graphic, but it can be a lot more vivid, if that makes sense.
It almost feels more graphic when that curtain stops moving.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh my God, you know.
Well, he was always really good at that. Like I thought of the that moment in Marnie as well when you know, he's kind of just like looking down at her on the bed, kind of slowly encroaching in, and you know it's about to happen, and it's so horrible, but you don't see it. Maybe he was, you know, that's probably one of the best things that.
He often will, in his sequences, not show you
Yeah.
what happens. It's also in Frenzy, where he takes the woman up the stairs, and you know he's going to rape and murder her too, and just slowly Hitchcock goes back down to the stairs and goes out into the street, and you're just watching all the people going by who are all just living their lives and completely unaware of the horror that is happening upstairs. That's an amazing sequence, but you could trace that all the way back to this film.
Hitchcock intentionally worked at a slow pace when the filming started as a silent film because he was anticipating that changes were underway and that he might be able to benefit with this movie. And in fact, that's exactly what happened, and that's what you mentioned in the introduction as well, that they simultaneously started filming two different versions about halfway through, and then that culminated in the rare occurrence of having both a sound and a silent version of the same film. So you've been working with this film for some time.
Yes, yeah, we originally scored it, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 10, you know, I lose track of time in films.
Yeah.
And it evolves. Some of our scores are a lot more specific, but most of them evolve over time, which also makes it fun, and I think hopefully good for a live audience that we're reacting and interacting, and not just playing the part, and you lose the emotion. So we definitely try to reel that in and then send it back out again.
Has it changed for you over time?
It has, and like I said, I think, you know, when we're young, we're, you know, banging harder, and oops, did I say that? And then when you're older, you learn how to gently caress. So. Yeah.
What were you up to accompaniment-wise when Frank first shows her the glove that he picked up?
I played the musical saw, which comes in handy with the tension and the eerie, and just try to make it as creaky and dissonant as possible, and try to follow their hand movements, you know, subtly as Roger's playing, you know, these gentle string low notes to make you a little uncomfortable at the same time.
So when you guys, I didn't mean to cut you off or anything, but when you guys are coming up with a score for the first time, do you watch the film without any sound or anything at all, just once through, or do you kind of sit there, you know, with the instruments and try things out in real time?
We watch them completely silent at first, and we each take notes in our mind and write down some notes and have some ideas, and then when we sit down together, and we do this collectively, so when we sit down together, almost always those initial ideas that we had individually just go out the window. Mm-hmm. And the hardest part is finding the first piece. So a lot of times we will bypass the titles, and so we'll come back to that once we have an established theme, and then we just dive into the first scene, and you know, and then it's a race to the cool part, you know, we can come up with it first, and then it just sort of flows from there. Every now and then, you know, we get stuck, and we work on something for a while, and then you throw it away and go home, and the next day it usually just happens naturally. So, and then, you know, scene by scene and theme by theme, we do them kind of one at a time, and then we go back, and then the trick is to blend them all into hopefully one seamless thing, and which themes are going to come around again, and you know, perhaps a different instrumentation or a different feel or a different key, or you know, make it minor, things like that, to remind, because people, I think, you know, grasp onto something they know. So if a theme comes around a few times, now there's a comfort level. It's like, oh yeah, I know that one, even if you just heard it for the first time a few minutes ago.
It's actually the purpose of an overture. Which is,
Exactly.
That was interesting when you said you don't do the titles first, because at that point you don't really know what themes you need to introduce so the audience has that familiarity with it.
Exactly, and some of the films with the longer intros, then we do like a full-blown overture where you get pieces of each of them, so you're kind of prepared when they come around again.
Is it piecemeal? Do you like, is this like we're gonna do this scene today and figure that out, then the next day you're gonna do the next scene, or?
You start at the beginning and see how far you get that day, and then you go back and just kind of chug through, and then we go back and listen to the whole thing, the basic ideas, and did the basic idea work? And if we think it did, then we expound upon it. And if we don't think it did, we throw it out and try to come up with something new. And then the next day you listen to it again. Now is that actually working? And how do you mold that into the scene? And then transition from one to the other.
The opening of the film is sort of like a master class of silent cinema with the whole police chase and then the procedural, and that would have been of significant interest to people, to moviegoers at the time. The whole process of the lineup that we recognize, where she's identifying them, and that would have been a more mysterious process to many people, which would make that an engaging way to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, he actually even has like it's not a title card. He very intelligently uses some kind of, they don't even call it a lineup. I forget what he calls it, but it allows you to read what you're about to see, because I don't think people were familiar with it.
Sure, yeah. And it's a nice Hitchcock touch that it ends with the policeman washing up in a bathroom. He liked to take people into some places that movies didn't always, think to go, but they're cleaning up at the end of their work, and that seems like a nice...
Cleaning up crime.
Cleaning up the crime. The other thing that I always think when I see this film is usually in movies after the code, if you commit a murder of some kind, you have to have some kind of punishment, and her only punishment is the guilt. And obviously she's defending herself and things like this, as a different thing. But it's actually I'm so glad she gets away with it.
Everyone's glad she gets away with it. Good for her.
Yeah, I think
And
there was somebody in the
hopefully it
audience that I heard, like, when the hand blow out, they were like, yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
And we like to think he didn't get too far before she had to take care of business.
Hitchcock had wanted the film, they went through a lot of rewrites. It was based on a popular play. And he
Great
wanted,
writer, Charles Bennett.
Yeah.
Charles Bennett does so much stuff with Hitchcock, like the 39 Steps, A Man Who Knew Too Much. He worked on them like 5 or 6 times. So Bennett is a great screenwriter.
They changed it considerably. And his initial desire was to have her confession then stand, and it ended then with Frank basically fingerprinting her and not being able to reveal. It would have put him at risk to show that he'd been implicated in the whole thing as well. And so her remaining silent and him remaining silent, and them, her, going to prison. But that was deemed to be too potentially depressing for audiences. And so Hitchcock felt like what we saw was a compromise, although
Do you
they
know
all
how the play
suffered.
ends?
Pardon me?
Do you know how the play ends?
Not at all like that. Yeah. They completely rewrote the third act.
What does happen?
No, I don't know. We don't know.
But everyone's happy to see Tracy.
You're the student. Go home and
Yeah,
figure it out.
everyone's happy to see Tracy fall through the roof.
Go to the stacks at the library and have it for your study, and figure out where the Charles Bennett's play ends.
But that's another scene where he doesn't show him actually dying. It's like, all right, he went through and we know what happened, but you have to believe it yourself and see it however you want to see it.
Yeah, that was a motif that we saw yesterday in Cookie's Fortune as well, that the draped hand there. This might be a good time to take some questions from the audience. If anybody would like to
There she is, right there.
step forward and...
Right there in front row.
There's a microphone right here for you.
Oh, you room right here, right? Yeah, go for it.
They have a process.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm do too many Q&As on my own, so I just point. But, The other thing is the one organization that I left out when I did the intro is the Hollywood Foreign Press, and they actually helped a great deal in getting this film restored. They're actually they used the profits from the Golden Globes presentation to also have a film foundation for restorations and things like this. They do a great job.
We've got a question up in the balcony.
Okay.
Good morning. What did Hitchcock do in this film that would have been considered innovative for this time?
I mean, I think almost everything we've been talking about, just the way that you know, like all the various cuts, all the you know, just the visual presentation of different scenes. I mean, I can't get more specific than that. I guess.
One thing that really stuck out to me was when they're looking through the records, trying to find Tracy's, you know, trying to find him in the book. It's an incredible montage. That one, I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Another element would be the ending of the film, and that was a very young Michael Powell, who was a still photographer at the time, was sort of being mentored by Alma and Alfred Hitchcock, and they like to encourage, you know, real creative thinking, and he came up with the idea of the British Museum because he'd spent time there growing up, yeah, and with that, it ushers in sort of a continued theme in Hitchcock's work where you're having these climaxes at these monumental, you know, spaces that almost take on an energy and an interest that's completely separate from the actual, you know, chase or sequence, you know, whatever's driving the plot forward. So by having him climb up the top of that, that's continuing something that Hitchcock will carry through, you know, for decades, right, in terms of whether it's Mount Rushmore, you know, or the Statue of Liberty, and so that's definitely something significant.
Yeah, Hitchcock loved that because he felt that an audience, when they're watching the scene, a good portion of the audience will say, "I was there," and so it actually feels like they become part of it because they're familiar with that location before they get there.
I have a question, front center here.
My question is about the instruments, because I'm sitting here and I can see them so well. And I was wondering, the saw, is that a specialized saw that you buy?
It's a musical saw. It's actually a Stradivarius. They stamped it right on there. That's true. It's a, you know, traditional old-time instrument played either with a rubber mallet or a violin bow, and I use the violin bow. And the antique saws would bend nicely, but these days the saws are too rigid. So there's this is from a Swedish saw maker called Sandvikers, and they make actual carpentry saws and then some specialized musical saws. So it's more pliable and you can play with it, but yeah.
I have a weird saw film score story that has nothing to do with Hitchcock, but it has to do with using a saw as a score for a film. I worked several times with a director named Milos Forman. He directed the movie Tonight, Man on the Moon, but he also directed a movie called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
I was going to say, that's the one, yeah.
And he told the story where he had hired Jack Nietzsche, I think, to do the score. He was a rock and roll producer. And they had set up a recording studio for him to come in. Milos had not heard anything, and they were just going to go right and record the score. And they kept on sending messages. This was before people had cell phones, you know, trying to get a hold of Jack, saying, "What do you need? Do you need a full orchestra? Do you need 3 violins? Do you need blah blah blah?" And they were getting no information whatsoever. And so Michael Hausman, who was the line producer, he also produced Man on the Moon. He also produced. Did a lot of work on Eternal Sunshine, which you saw the other day. But Michael Hausman kind of panicked at the last minute, said like, let's just hire an orchestra. We'll hire an orchestra, bring them in, and so when Jack comes in, we have anybody he needs. And so they hire the orchestra, and Jack comes in, and Jack's accompanied by a guy with a little case, and and he comes in and says like, what are these people doing here? And I don't need any of these people. And like, what's going on? The guy opens a case, and it's a saw. And so the score for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is almost exclusively saw.
It's needless to say, it's one of my favorites ever, yeah.
I have a question down right.
Hi. This is actually 3 parts. First of all, it's amazing that the Anvil Orchestra can do that live, no mistakes, no retakes. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you so much.
I love it. You guys come. So I learned 2 things. One from your discussion with Larry and Terry, and the other from the beginning of the film. I knew the word flying squad, but I never pictured it as this big old truck with a big radio in the back. The overture, it never dawned on me that that was like a overview of what was coming next.
Right.
The question has to do with the whole purpose of that flying squad incident, I assume, was to introduce Frank, but it didn't seem to really have anything to do with the rest of the movie.
Well, it introduced Frank, and then they come around later when they're chasing. They're, you know, let's bring the flying squad and let's catch this fella.
I think
So-
what it does is it sets a tone for the film. I mean, I kind of agree with what you're saying, but it sets the tone as a crime film. So when you're watching the movie, you are already in this sense of like you're going to deal with the underworld. You're going to deal. Otherwise, you're just going to start the movie with this couple going out on a date, you know, and so it won't feel like the rest of the film. And so once you start the movie there, you understand what the stakes are. It's got it's a thriller. A lot of times when you make a film, you've got to figure out like, hey, how do we grab them in the first 5 minutes? And I think that's what's there for. Another great Hitchcock sequence when the guy's sitting in the bed and he looks over and he sees the mirror and he's trying to get the gun. It's like he always does that such a great job of getting you like the whatever on the edge of your seat over nothing happening actually when you're watching it.
Right, and then how do you score that? How do you build the tension at the appropriate time? And you just hope for the best.
I think we have time for one more question.
We have one up here in the balcony again.
Yes, do you know how much restoration and what type of restoration need to be done to the movie itself?
Yes, this is done by like BFI, British Film Institute, and the Film Foundation, which is Scorsese's organization, and the Hollywood Foreign Press. And I believe what they did was they take the original camera neg, transfer it to 4K, and do various tweaks and things like that on that. Then they retransfer it back to film. Film still is the most stable thing we have. The big problem is I think 90% of silents have actually been lost because once there's no commercial avenue for things, people tend to forget about them. And the organization that I'm currently on the board of, the National Film Preservation Foundation, was put together by Congress, actually in the Library of Congress, to sort of protect what we call orphan films. And orphan films are not like made by the studios. They're sort of films that have kind of, whether they're silents or they're experimental films or they're films by amateurs or just like a lot of, believe it or not, we give a lot of grants to restore home movies because we feel like that's history there. You're seeing how people actually lived, and these are not things that people are paying big money for, and so there's no cash value in restoring a silent film. But this particular thing, I think BFI went back and restored the Hitchcock 7, I think they called them, and they're the first 7 Hitchcock movies, and most of them are silent. But I think that my organization recently found another Hitchcock movie like made when he was 24. So there's a continuing thing. The organization, it's like all these organizations kind of do different things. Scorsese obviously is like the king of restoration right now, and so if you can get a grant from him, you're actually in good shape. I think this weekend another film festival, the Turner Classic Film Festival, is happening in Hollywood, and they're premiering a new 70mm restoration of The Searchers, and apparently that looks amazing. And I was vice president of the Academy, and the Academy, I think their big thing this year, and I'm very proud that we did this, once again, it was with Milos Forman. We restored the original theatrical version of Amadeus, which actually hasn't been able to be shown in quite some time, and it's a beautiful, beautiful film, yeah. So I think that'll come out later this year. The National Film Preservation Foundation does things like, actually, I think 2 of our latest grants went to Chicago-based projects. I think the Chicago Film Society, we gave them a grant to restore a documentary called Demon Lover Diary. It's a really goofy movie that it's about the making of a horror film that these guys are trying to make, and everything goes wrong, and that's really cool. And then we gave a grant to the Chicago Film Archive to restore. This is kind of what I was saying before, amateur films. There's a amateur, he's not really an amateur filmmaker, but there's a filmmaker that worked like in Super 8 and things like this, and he had a bunch of film of the riot at Kaminsky Park when the Disco Sucks night. And so that is actually being restored. Once again, you're just trying to preserve history that wouldn't actually be preserved. I mean, imagine if you had home movies from Cleopatra's era. This is what, it's that thing. It would show you how they actually lived as opposed to just, just what was written down.
Thank you for your work in preserving cinema. Thank you for bringing this film to life for us, the most dynamic. Some consider to be one of the first talking films as well. Yeah. And thank you for coming out. Yeah.
Thank you. And we will be in the back lobby. Roger Miller from the Anvil Orchestra right now before lunch has a few things in the East lobby for you. And Matt Singer will be back there signing his book for a few minutes before we go to lunch. And I'll go back and sign my book too before lunch. And we'll see you at 1 o'clock here. Thank you.
And I'll see you at 9 o'clock here too.
See, today, seeing this